Before we get to today's episode of 80 More Things, I just wanted to pop in here with a quick disclaimer. The purpose of this podcast is to give people in the community a place to express their opinions and their voice. I just want to be clear that the opinions of our guests are theirs and that Julie and I may or may not agree with their point of view. With that, let's get started.
I could go on listing things off, 80 more things. I just keep on singing these songs till Avery's freedom rings. I said it matters, it really does, I know it matters. This could be you, I said it matters. This could be me, I said it matters.
Welcome to 80 More Things, where we go beyond making a murderer and discuss questionable details of the Teresa Halbach murder case. My name is Fen. You can find me on Twitter at FenMN. If you haven't yet watched the Netflix series Making a Murderer, stop listening to this podcast right now and go watch both seasons before joining us here, or a lot of this won't really make any sense to you. I'm joined here by my co-host, Julie Pom-Pom. Hello, Julie. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited about this episode because our guest today is arguably the most prominent YouTube commentator on the Teresa Halbach case. His YouTube channel, Erekose on Making a Murderer, has over 6,000 subscribers as of this recording. And like I said last episode, after I watched MAM, I started looking around for more information about the case because I believe Stephen and Brendan are innocent, and I have a strong desire to learn more about the case. Erekose was one of the first YouTubers I found talking about the case, so I've always found him to be drama-free, no nonsense, straightforward, and he's always open to feedback from both people who agree with him and also people who don't agree with him. So he's always been willing to listen to another person's point of view and respectfully disagree without belittling that person. And that is something that has always appealed to me about Erekose. So he's been talking about this case for several years now. And he's also researched and commented in his videos on many other cases of wrongful convictions and false confessions. And so that is going to be the topic of our conversation on this episode. So I'm so pleased to be able to welcome Erekose to 80 More Things.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And hello, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
So last time, Julie and I talked a little bit about what brought us to the case, like what was interesting to us, what made us want to get involved and do more. So can you talk some about what is it that interested you about this case?
Well, for me, obviously, I probably, like a lot of people tuning into this podcast, had a huge interest in true crime. I mean, my TV spent 90% of its time on investigation discovery. That was just what I spent most of my time watching. I had an interest. And when Making a Murderer came out, the truth of it is, I wasn't very convinced about Stephen at the beginning. It was Brendan that really drew me in, because I was so sure that he was innocent. I was so sure that what had happened to him was a ridiculous farce. For me, there was just no doubt. And the fact that I had no doubt for Brendan and was willing to go all in for Brendan got me looking into the deeper into the paperwork. And I just kept finding that crap with this case just continued to go on and go deeper and deeper. You would just constantly find points in the investigation where it just wasn't handled right. You know, like, for instance, the usual suspects weren't talked to or interrogated or anything. They just skip right over the usual suspects. I will say, because of today's episode, by the way, that's an earmark of a wrongful conviction. Okay? That's an earmark you can look for. So there's things you can look for when you're reviewing cases. And that's one of the things that you can look for is there's going to be earmarks. I'm going to be talking about threads running through wrongful convictions and stuff today. But that's the main theme that I want to get everybody to understand, is that all these cases of wrongful convictions and coerced confessions and all that, they have the same events taking place, and they share this in common. And when you can string that together, it kind of makes it easier to pick out the bogus convictions.
Yeah, it seems to me in this case, I think it's pretty obvious that they wanted to get Stephen Avery however they could.
It's like, yeah, from the word go. From the word go, literally. And it's all kind of, we don't talk about it much anymore, but it was a real big part of Making a Murderer 1. The one officer that calls in and says, do we have Stephen Avery in custody yet? Or have we, and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Or has he been charged yet? It's like the RAV4 was just found like 20 minutes ago, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you know it's Stephen? I mean, there's a lot of people that live on that salvage yard. If you're going to go with the reasoning that it was somebody that lived there, well, there's a hell of a lot more people than Stephen that live there. So how do you immediately jump to Stephen? Especially when you've already wrongfully convicted this man once and you're so eager to jump to him.
Well, and for that matter, they had found the RAV 20 minutes before, but that's it. They found a car.
They found a
They
car.
didn't find a person. They didn't even look inside
They didn't
the
look
car.
inside of it. Yeah.
So what the heck is he in custody for?
And poor Brendan, over time, it turned out that he was Stephen's alibi. And
Right.
that's why they went after Brendan so hard. They had to not only take him out of being his alibi, but also they found, I think, that they could utilize him to further their case.
It's disgusting. Sorry.
And they did by using that confession, that coerced and fed confession. They used that in their little press conference.
Ugh.
They colored the entire population of Wisconsin. There was no chance Steve and Brendan were going to get an impartial jury after that press conference. No way.
No.
I mean, it's just, and to hear King Kratz nowadays go and say, oh, well, if I had it to do again, I would have just gone in there and read the whatever statement, right? It's what he keeps saying now. That's what he would have done, and it's like, but that's not what you did, Ken. And I don't think it was accidental.
No, it definitely wasn't.
Right. So
you've been, as you said, interested in coercion cases, wrongful conviction cases, and just crime in general for a long time.
Right.
There are some other cases that you've been making videos about that I've seen.
Yes.
Scott Davis being one of them.
Right. One of them is Scott Davis. Scott Davis is a case that just fries me, man. It just fries me that was able to happen in America. I mean, there's so much to go through in this case, but I'll start out with the fact that by the time they brought charges against Scott Davis, which they didn't bring charges against him until like 10 years later, 8 years later, something like 8 to 10 years later, and they decide to bring charges, and they've lost or can't find 72 pieces of the evidence. 72 pieces. Now, they did eventually, when it was all said and done before trial, they had found 22 of those pieces. So it was only 50. It was only 50 missing pieces of evidence. Do you feel any better about that?
That's so much better.
Oh, yeah.
Among those 50 pieces of evidence, a blood swab that they believe belonged to the killer. Fingerprints off of the Porsche that belonged to the victim and was burned. So fingerprints off of there. By the way, the DNA was never run through CODIS, and the fingerprints were never run through APHIS. Another earmark, folks. You got to watch out for those earmarks, because there's another one. Not running DNA through CODIS and not running prints through APHIS. If you see that happening, your eye should start twitching or something. Your spidey sense should start tingling, whatever. It's something you should start feeling a little something is going wrong, or, a little something in the air. Scott Davis ultimately is convicted on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence. This is another earmark, not a huge one. I wouldn't key on it specifically, because there are circumstantial cases that are perfectly legit. But if you see it's circumstantial and you start seeing some of the other earmarks, pay attention. But Scott's case is highly circumstantial. Highly. Then you add the fact that we have it proven, a statement. Well, I guess let me explain a little bit of the relationships between Scott Davis, his wife, and the victim. Scott Davis was married to Megan Lee Davis. They were separating. They were getting a divorce. Scott wasn't too keen on it. Megan was all ready to run away and jump into the arms of another man. And so it was a little bit complicated. But Megan was dating this guy, this gentleman, David Coffin. David Coffin is the son of a very rich man. He's the CEO of a huge company, and like, and so they have like more money than you could imagine. They're not hurting for money, and well, that's the kind of thing Megan goes after. If you look into her past a bit, she's kind of that way, and so she's going after David Coffin. Well, suddenly David Coffin ends up killed in his home, and his house is on fire. Okay, so here's where the rub comes in. They immediately kind of go after Scott on this. They start interrogating Scott, and Scott eventually says, "Look, guys, I didn't shoot him." Okay? The detective immediately goes, "Wait, what?" Because the detective doesn't know anything about anybody being shot, right? So he immediately goes, "Wait, how do you know he's been shot?" And so Scott says, "Well, Megan told me." Okay? The detective says, "Really? Okay." Walks out of the room, walks over to Megan, and asks her, "Did you say this to Scott?" Blah, 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 whatever. She, of course, denies it.
Well,
Denies it, right? Then he walks over to the victim's best friend, okay? To the victim's best friend, and he asks the same question, to which the victim's best friend says, "Yes, my girlfriend and I heard her saying that on the phone to Scott while the house was burning," essentially. Chambers ignores that, walks right back into the interrogation room, and starts laying right back into Scott, knowing that somebody else knew that this guy had been shot in the head while his body was in a burning house. I mean, this is a huge thing in the case, huge, part of the case. And like I said, these are the things that you see, ignoring of the usual suspects. Look, Megan was the girlfriend. She should have been the first person being looked at. As soon as there was any hint that she made a statement like this, everything should have stopped and everybody should have been going, "Whoa, let's take inventory again." Because that should have suggested something was off the rails, or at least they didn't have all the information, to put it mildly.
And have they given any explanation for how the 50 pieces of evidence became missing?
Missing.
Just that it was being held by several different agencies. There was DeKalb Fire Department had some of it. Atlanta Police Department had some of it. Fulton County DA's office had some of it. Crime Lab had some of it. Like, and all these different places, just some of it got lost during like remodels or things like that. And some of it just, so basically the judge, when he decided that this was going to go to trial, he basically rubber stamped that whatever happened was fine. We're moving forward. And for me, the judge is a piece of work to allow this. You know what I mean? Hey, judge, let me ask you something. Would you like to be brought up on charges and then have a judge say that it's okay, 50 pieces of your evidence are gone?
Right. Right.
So similar to in the Stephen Avery case, many people listening to this podcast may not know that some evidence has recently gone missing. It wasn't addressed in Making a Murderer because it wasn't known when Making a Murderer was released.
Right.
And that is the bones that were used as evidence in the trial have basically been destroyed by the state by giving them to the Habach family for burial, even though
essentially they consider them destroyed because now there's a contamination thing.
Right.
They can't be used anymore as evidence.
I mean, the arguments about contamination would just go on and on and on, and it would just be,
they're essentially destroyed at this point, even if they were, I know, well, okay. The thing that really gets me about that whole thing is the fact that Kathleen is Stephen Avery's lawyer, which I guess you know that if you've watched Making a Murderer too. She had asked the state for those bones, and I think that was covered in Making a Murderer too. She was asking for the bones, they said they'd give them to her, and then at the last minute, something happened.
Oh, well, yeah, yes. In Making a Murderer 2, they talked about back before Judge Sukowitz denied the original motion for post-conviction relief, the original 97-406, the 1,000-page thing. Before she had denied that, Kathleen Zellner was talking with Fallon, and Fallon was agreeing to allow her to test some things, and all this stuff. He was dealing with her. I think he honestly didn't realize what Judge Sukowitz was going to do, because the moment that the decision came through, he was retreat. I mean, dude, he was vapor.
Uh-huh.
He was like, so I think it might have been talking about that, because literally Making a Murderer 2 came out on October 18th, 2018. I think it's the 18th. And it came out in October, mid-October, essentially. She made her motion to ask for testing December 18th of 2018. So that was when she asked to do the testing. And of course, on my channel, I have a group of researchers and folks, of which Fen and Julie here are a part of, the Wrecking Crew, and they noticed immediately that these bones that she was asking to test were in the final pages of CASO as being given back. CASO is the investigation reports, for those of you who don't know. But it's in the final pages of CASO that those bones have been given back. And so she didn't have that. You got to understand, how did Zellner not know that, right? That's the question it begs, right? Well, that's because the state hadn't turned over the paperwork basically showing what they had done. They had held it back because they didn't want anybody to know they had done it.
And it's illegal that they did it. They are supposed to hold on to that stuff until until either whoever is in prison for committing this crime is out of prison or dead. Right.
Deceased. Deceased, out of prison, deceased, released, or there's a third one. What was the third one?
I think it is just deceased or released.
Those are the two main ones that really matter.
No longer in prison. Yes. Or, well, they are no longer in custody.
Or they get permission. Or they get...
Or they notify the person or persons and,
and receive their permission.
Permission or correspondence or et cetera. Making a Murderer 2 was released on October 19th.
Which is Brendan's birthday. 19th. So you were right about that.
19th.
I knew it was his birthday. I just couldn't remember which day it was.
Yes, it was the 19th. But the thing is, not only was it illegal for them to have given him back, yes, but the state claims that they delivered that information to Kathleen Zellner, but they delivered her everything she asked for except that page of that document. Like, that's the only page they left out, right?
Yeah.
So that...
Well, it's just like they didn't complete the record after they did it, right? They didn't send over the new ledgers and the new pages of the investigation report. They just said, on to this, right?
Yeah, no, I apologize. That was my mistake. That was not the only thing they left out. But out of the CASO report, they didn't include that page.
Right.
But there were other documents that they said they provided and didn't. And that page was one of them. So intentional or coincidence. That's another thing, like you were talking about in the last episode, Fen, where you were saying, this was a typo. You can only excuse so many typos. You can only excuse so many, oops, I missed that page, before it's a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that they were negotiating to turn over these bones, knowing full well that they didn't have them. They've been destroyed in 2011, which is quite a long time ago.
Yeah. Way before they were negotiating. Oh, yeah, I'll let you test this bone. I know I don't have it anymore, but I'm going to let you test it. What the heck?
Another favorite tactic of theirs is to tell her to drop the appeal, and they'll let her test whatever she wants, knowing full well they don't have it to test.
Mm-hmm.
Drop the appeal.
Yeah.
Nice try.
Yeah, and the Court of Appeals was real amused with that argument. Along with the procedural bar argument, the Court of Appeals basically, that was great. And I think that was a big reason why we ended up seeing ADA Sukowitz when she made her decision regarding this issue, because she probably, if the Court of Appeals hadn't written their decision with such disdain for the way that the state had argued there at the Court of Appeals, I think Judge Sukowitz knew that arguing procedural bar or finding, or making her ruling based on procedural bar was probably not going to go over very well. So she had to actually try to do it on its merits. And it got interesting because, like I said, she started playing assistant district attorney during her little decision there. So that's going to get interesting when this gets reviewed. So it's going to be fun.
So what are some other interesting cases that you have?
Right. Outside of Scott Davis, there's another one that really fries me as well. And that is Devante Sanford. You guys can find a video on my YouTube channel, Erekose Making a Murderer, called The Innocence Deniers. That kind of goes through this a little bit more. But basically what it comes down to is we once again have police officers who can't figure out who actually committed a certain crime. And so they find the nearest mentally challenged kid and coerce a confession out of him. Okay, because that's what's happened here.
And he was what, 14?
He was like 14, yeah, 14, I think, at the time. So the best part of it, I mean, look, it's bad enough that the kid was preyed upon because he was, somewhat, not mentally on par with his peers. I'll put it that way, right? So it's bad enough that he was victimized and that sort of thing by police for that. But it gets better. I say better. It gets worse. They convict the kid, okay? DA Kim Worthy is her name. If you hear that name, be skeptical in the future, involved with any court case you're following, because she is an unscrupulous DA who only cares about getting convictions. She doesn't care about justice. It's about convictions. Only about convictions. That is the only thing that enters her realm of, reality, basically. So she is a bad customer. She convicts the kid. 7 days after he is convicted, the hitman who actually performed this crime comes forward and spills the beans. Tells him where to find the gun that matches the ballistics for this scene and 2 others, because he had killed 12 people that night. Okay? 4 people at each scene. 3 scenes with 4 people. Okay? So he leads them to the gun, matches the ballistics, all that stuff. He gives a statement, an affidavit saying, dude, Devante Sanford, I don't know who that kid is. He had nothing to do with this. Blah, 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 basically giving a statement that this is all me. I did this. I'm taking credit for what I did. He was a hitman. He was hired by some rich guy to get rid of these drug dealers or something like that for some reason, whatever. That's what it was. That's why it happened. So he does this 7 days after Devante Sanford's conviction. Guess what Kim Worthy does, folks? She just says, oh, you know what? We're just gonna convict you for these 8 murders over here and let Devante Sanford rot for 15 years, folks, until finally his lawyers had to petition the actual AG. They had to petition the AG of the state to eventually get involved and overrule Kim Worthy, because she was not going to set it right. She was going to sit on it and sit on it and sit on it. She wasn't going to set it right. And so they had to go over her head, and it was so obvious that it got turned over.
Wow. That is despicable.
And trust me, had Devante Sanford had the right thing happen 7 days after his conviction, you wouldn't have had to pay him $500,000.
That is a problem, I think, with our justice system in general, is that once you're convicted of something, it's very, very difficult to go back. Once that conviction is there, it's really hard to change it.
Yeah, it's very, yeah.
It is. And they say all the time, oh, well, if you're wrongfully convicted, you have resources available to you to, correct the mistake. And
sure.
It's a lie. It's a lie.
enough?
It's like a salesman that tells you,
Yeah.
sure, you can cancel the contract. All you have to do is call us. And then you try to cancel it, and no, you can't. It's the same exact thing. Oh, yeah, there are avenues that you can utilize in order to appeal your case. And if you're actually innocent, get out. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah. It's all about finality with the courts. And as much as I understand that, it's like everybody's gotten so caught up in finality that common sense has gone out the window.
Yes.
And so it's like, wait a second, you know, it's very difficult. I was just watching over on Linda's listening channel yesterday. I was watching the case. I forget the guy's name, but he was the case in South Carolina that kind of got the ball rolling for Michael Peterson in the staircase, because he was wrongfully convicted on some bogus evidence because Devers testified and said that there was some of the victim's blood on his car, and it actually wasn't. There was a red spot, but it wasn't even blood. They ended up finding this out later, but it wasn't even blood. And Devers had testified that it was the victims. All this, guy gets convicted. Well, in South Carolina, this was very interesting. I'd like to see this happen in more states. In South Carolina, they've actually passed legislation there where they have like this independent innocence counsel, and you can, like, if you don't have anything that you can do in court, like all your legal options are gone and there's no way you can get back into court, you can petition this commission based on your claims of actual innocence, because the courts actually don't have a way for you to go into them and argue actual innocence. They only have a way for you to go in and argue this was done wrong and that's a violation of my constitutional rights or whatever. They only have like technical things like that to argue about in court. So South Carolina brilliantly set up this commission, and this guy was able to petition the commission, and they ended up giving him a hearing where he sat in front of a 3-judge panel, a tribunal, and they sided with him. They let him go because they realized he was actually innocent. And that, I think, is brilliant. Would like to see more of that pop up.
That's actually really interesting that, I guess, in South Carolina, they've decided that once you're guilty, that's it. You're guilty. There's no possibility for a mistake.
Well, but by setting up this commission.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you know, it's pretty cool. I thought it was, I didn't know that previously because the staircase doesn't talk about that when I'm watching the staircase. So it was interesting to see this guy's story and to see that aspect of it. I was like, oh, that's interesting, you know. So I may look a little bit more into that in the future myself. So
that would be good.
It's Greg Taylor is the person the video is about.
Yeah. And I mean, he was up to no good that night, but he wasn't murdering that poor girl. So
right.
I mean, he was smoking a lot of crack, and you know, he was, you know, having a good old time, but that wasn't among the things he was doing.
And you know what? I'd like to say something about that. There are a lot of people who, you know, in being involved in the community that talks about this case and is looking into this case and all of that, there are people who have so many different opinions, and there are supporters and there are what we call guilters, right? Mm-hmm. And the guilters always say, how can you support these people because they did this and this and this? And that's the thing. Just because somebody
I've always seen Stephen to be telling the truth, and I see the state to be a bunch of freaking lying jerks.
Right, but even beyond that, just because somebody did something bad doesn't make them a murderer. Just because somebody made a bad decision doesn't make them a murderer. Just because I support somebody's innocence doesn't mean I think they're a great upstanding person. Not that anybody, not that I'm saying anybody isn't. The point is, I don't care what somebody has done that is outside of that. It doesn't make them a murderer just because they made a bad decision or just because they did something wrong. I've made bad decisions before. Doesn't make me a killer.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at. So for you to say, oh yeah, but you know, he did this, I don't care. Doesn't make him a killer.
Right. I don't know. And other things that basically weren't violent murder to somehow equate to him being a violent murderer is like, no, that doesn't quite wash. Try again.
Well, he stole Oreos from the grocery store that one time.
Yeah.
So he obviously
he broke into that bar and stole $10 and a ham sandwich, right? Oh, right. Dude, this guy is breaking the bank. Oh my God, we got to get him off the streets.
Yes, horrible, hardened criminal.
Right.
Scum.
It also kills me. Sheriff Peterson, in particular, just won't admit that he's innocent in the 1985 case.
We won't admit it.
He just won't.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, that, you know, those players in '85, those original '85 players, they're still unwilling to say that Stephen's innocent of raping Penny Burnson. It's like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's like she described the attacker as having underwear. Stephen Avery didn't own any underwear at the time. How do you?
Well, I mean he was seen by 16 people.
And
he's got 16 alibis.
A receipt from Green Bay. I mean,
and a receipt, paper, not just somebody's word, like paper.
It's I mean, it's just
And Jean Couché, if he was still around, he would still be saying that that Stephen was guilty. I don't know where the DNA came from. I don't know where your drawing came from either.
God. When I hear him doing that
just saying.
Oh, jeez. Anyways.
Okay, actually, I lied. I do know where his drawing came from.
Yes, me too. I know exactly where it came from. And
absolutely.
Who's watched Making a Murderer can see it with their own eyes. Where it came from.
Absolutely.
In a frame.
Exactly. Right.
It totally looks like Afro Stephen Avery from 4 months prior to that drawing. So
what a striking resemblance.
I'm just a pencil. Yeah, sure you are. You keep telling yourself that. Don't quit your day job.
Any other interesting cases you want to talk about, Erekose?
Yeah,
convictions and coerced confessions.
Going along that thread there. So we talked about Devante Sanford, and then, we can talk about something like the Central Park Five.
Also known as the Exonerated Five.
Right, the Exonerated Five. Back in 1989, we had one night there in New York City. There was a bunch of kids getting together on the streets there, and they would just kind of get together and run as a pack, and they went into Central Park, and there was a lot of things going on that night. There was some kids that were hassling people on bikes. There were some people that were hassling, people, and I guess maybe some petty theft took place, and, things like that, a fight here or there. And so there was some general kind of
shenanigans
going on, with these kids. And it was referred to at the time as wilding. It's just kind of the phrase that got coined for it. And it was just them going out, stirring up trouble, basically, you know how kids are. But certainly there was nobody going out murdering. Okay. These were all just kids. Okay. It's, they were getting into general mischief, I would say, but no, definitely nothing serious. So what ends up happening is that the Central Park jogger, comes jogging into the park, and eventually she gets attacked, dragged off into some bushes, and raped and beaten very badly, and basically left for dead. But she survived. She has terrible double vision. She has trouble walking up and down stairs. She has trouble just walking on flat surfaces. If you guys watch some of the Central Park 5 stuff and the Exonerated 5 stuff out there, it's unfortunate what happened to her, but it certainly wasn't these kids' fault what happened. And the killer for me, is that police knew they had a rapist, an active rapist in that part of New York at that time, but that they couldn't catch. And yet they were still eager to pin this on 5 kids and feed them a confession. And it is fed. Okay? Because it's all about, oh, Ricky says you said that, blah, blah, blah. So then that guy says something about Ricky. You know, it was all, they were just playing these kids against each other, saying that these other kids said something until they all started telling on each other. Not at any point did any one of these kids say, I did something. Never happened. They were just busy trying to pass the buck, you know, and point at somebody else when they, you know, because these cops were coming in going, yeah, well, Johnny says you said that, he said that you were, you know, you ejaculated on her or something or whatever, right? And then so then he starts feeling all defensive because he thinks somebody said that about him, and so he says something about somebody else. And they were just, this is what they were doing to these 5 kids, just playing them against each other like that, all around and around. And it all turns out in the end that it was exactly the suspect that they should have been thinking of in the first place, the East Side rapist. He's the guy that did it. He eventually admits it. You want to know why? Because he saw Corey King in prison and saw everything that Corey was going through and knew Corey was innocent, and he actually had some humanity. Surprisingly, this guy had some humanity. He had found God, according to him. He was, you know, becoming very religious. Maybe that was part of it, but he did the right thing and took credit for it, and took credit for what happened to the Central Park jogger. And Mateus Reyes is his name. And he took credit for that, and still the DA and all that, and they were dragging their feet. They didn't want to do anything about it. It was a fight, but they eventually got, you know, they eventually got exonerated. It's just horrendous. I mean, one of the things that bothers me the most is the lead prosecutor in this shows up at the scene and clearly points out that there was one attacker. You could see the footprints, blah, blah, blah. Like the way she's describing the scene, she knows there's one attacker. And yet their answer in this, every time they kept running into roadblocks because they were trying to pit in on these kids and it just wasn't quite working, their answer was to add another suspect. Well, let's just add another suspect. It was this guy too. It's like, how does adding more suspects make this better? That's the one thing I never understood about their strategy, but.
You know why? It's because they didn't care about justice. They cared about getting a conviction. Yeah. They cared about making the public happy. They cared about being congratulated for doing their job. They didn't care about giving this woman justice. They didn't care about stopping a rapist. They didn't care about those things. That is my biggest problem with all of this. With every single time something like this happens, it's because they don't care about actually protecting people. Mm-hmm. They care about getting recognition for doing a job well done. They care about not letting anybody know that they screwed up, and they care about the people feeling like they're safe even though they're really not. Mm-hmm. You know, it's okay that there's a rapist still out there. They don't know that there's a rapist still out there, so it's fine. Yeah. That is my biggest problem with all of this.
And add to that, I mean, maybe if they would have pulled their heads out of their backsides, they might have caught Mateus Reyes sooner, before he went and raped and murdered that single mother with her 2 boys in the next room, crying the entire time. How much do you like that?
Exactly.
How's that image work for you?
Exactly.
Maybe that could have been avoided, you know?
Oh, it could have been. It could have been. Just like Gregory Allen raping that other woman.
Exactly. And was calling and harassing Penny Bernson and making her uncomfortable as well.
Exactly. Yes. Because they don't care about justice. They don't care about protecting these people. Yep. As long as they give it's
about the illusion.
It's the illusion of justice is what it is. Thank you very much, Stacy and Jerry Buting. And yeah.
They say.
So
the Central Park 5. There's the other part, and the other part about the Central Park 5, the exonerated 5, that gets me is the way that when they were trying to put their narrative together and they were taking all the events of the night, and they suddenly realized that from the confessions they were getting that something wasn't going to work with the timeline. So they actually took pieces of the timeline and like moved them around, like moved the timeline around. That's adjusting facts to fit your evidence instead of, you know what I mean? It's like to fit your narrative. And so that to me was a huge red flag. Like I said, these are all red flags. They're all earmarks, folks. These are all threads, seams that run through commonly through wrongful convictions and coerced confessions and basically just,
common denominators.
General jackassery at its worst.
Mm-hmm. Are we allowed to use that word?
I hope so.
Is this a G-rated podcast?
I don't think so, no. It's about murder, so.
Yeah, that's true.
There you go. So there's that, the Exonerated 5, Central Park 5, there's so much in that. Antron McCray, dude, the cops like literally intimidated his own father into making him confess. They intimidated his father into making his father go into that room and make Anton confess.
A kid.
Yeah. It's like
that upset me so much.
Oh, yes. It's so ridiculous.
It really did.
I was glad when I saw Yusef's mom come in there and they were trying to like get rid of her, and she's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just call the New York Times. And like then all of a sudden that lady, what's her name? Fairstein, right? She's all of a sudden like, oh, somebody at the New York Times? Like all of a sudden, like, she's like gives a crap. And she's like, yeah, I'm gonna call over there and tell him that you're interviewing a 16-year-old without his mom present and blah blah blah. Like, okay, come on up, right? And it's like she gets in there and immediately walks Yusef out of there. Yeah, what are you gonna do about it? We're leaving. Because
exactly.
Right. So
right.
And that was brilliant. And folks, take a lesson from that lady because she did the right thing. She got in there and said, "You arresting my boy? We're leaving. Bye."
Yes, public service announcement. Everybody tell your children. As Travis has told us how many times?
Yes.
If the cops want to talk to you, you tell your kids this. If the cops want to talk to you, what do you say? You say, I will be happy to talk to you when my mom and my lawyer are here. And then you shut your mouth and you don't say anything else. Period. Right. Nothing.
It's funny. There's a commercial here. Don't know if people know Darren Kavanoki. Anyway, he does a lot of DUI. He has this DUI commercial where he's advising people about DUI. He goes, if you get pulled over for a DUI, he goes, here's my advice to you. Shut the F up. He goes, it doesn't make you look guilty. It makes you look smart.
That's why they don't want you to do it. The cops will tell you, oh, it makes you look bad because they don't want you to do it.
Right.
And they're allowed to lie to you.
They are allowed to lie to you. The cops are allowed to lie to you. Remember that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've learned so much in the last 3 years going over Brendan's confession and various other cases and confessions. And it's like, I never would want to find myself in the position, but if I ever did find myself in the position of being interrogated about something I didn't do, I certainly know exactly what to look out for, and I certainly know where I would be heading off investigators at the pass.
I do now.
I do now too. I certainly didn't before.
Yeah, I didn't, 9 years ago when I was on the phone being questioned by police and said things I shouldn't have said that I didn't even realize I said, because, until you think about it or are told about it or experience it, you just don't know. Right. And that's why I tell everybody I have the opportunity to tell. If the cops want to talk to you, you shut your mouth. Even if you think what you say isn't going to make a difference, still shut your mouth. Just shut your mouth until you have a lawyer. Seriously, because you never know.
Mm-hmm. I watched a video, and I'll see if I can find it and put it on the website, but I watched a video. It was a lawyer talking to a group of people, and one of the things he said was, what if the police come to your door and they say, hey, did you order pizza last night? And you say, yeah. Well, what if I told you the pizza guy was found dead behind your house? Now all of a sudden you've admitted that you saw this pizza guy.
Exactly. And another thing I'd like to say, just not, I don't want to come across as like a cop hater. There are a lot of really, really upstanding, fantastic law enforcement officers out there. And I don't think any of the people in this community who are reasonable or have common sense are saying that all law enforcement is bad. But right. They are human beings. And so there are going to be some bad ones, just like there are some bad people, you know? And I think that the things that we are criticizing here are the behaviors of those people who intentionally did, you know, bad things. And I would hate to come across as somebody who's like, all cops are bad. Right. And I don't think that's necessarily true, but they're there to do a job, and they're not there to be your friend no matter what they tell you.
But I think they're human.
Yes, they are human.
They're human. And I think they sometimes take shortcuts that they shouldn't take.
Right.
And unfortunately, when cops take shortcuts that they shouldn't take, they're playing with people's lives.
Right.
And so it becomes a little more.
I don't think all of them appreciate that to the full extent that they're expected to.
Exactly, because everything's higher stakes with you know, their decision making. You know, it's just all the stakes are higher. So.
Right.
And I think even more and more now, they're trained to look at everyone as being a criminal. Right. That's how they're trained now.
Right.
Yeah,
because they need to protect themselves. They're in a dangerous job.
They do. I agree. But that does not include fabricating evidence, lying about things, not following protocols, and lying and being deceitful in order to just get a conviction against somebody that they don't actually have proof is guilty just because they don't like that person. That's, you know, an abuse of power and arrogance, and that's not okay.
And that's what happened in the Teresa Halbach case. That's exactly what happened.
Exactly.
Right.
Erekose, thank you so much for joining us. This was a really great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really honored that you joined us. You have a lot to share. How can people find you?
Well, you can find me, I guess, on YouTube, number one, Erekose on Making a Murderer. I have probably close to 700 videos now. So there's plenty of stuff to go through on my channel. I also am on Twitter. You can find me at Erekose on MAM. I'm also on Facebook. There's a Facebook page, Erekose MAM Facebook page. So you can find me there. And that's mainly where I post and where you can find content from me. We also have a community of the Wrecking Crew, which meets on a platform called Discord. So anybody that's interested in that, I'm sure we'll have all the links for you guys in the info of this podcast.
Yep, I'll make sure to put all the links in there and also on the website, 80morethings.com.
Awesome.
All right, so that'll wrap up this episode of 80 More Things. If you have a topic that you want us to cover, or if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, visit the website, 80morethings.com, and let us know what you want to talk about. While you're there, don't forget to click on the link to sign the petition to pass the Juvenile Interrogation and Protection Law. Also, be sure to check out Dassey Seabrook on YouTube. You can find a link to his channel in the show notes and on the website. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Why it matters.